Late afternoon. The Arizona desert was quiet except for the sound of wind brushing against the dry earth. Dust swirled gently along a lonely highway near Winslow. There, standing beneath a burning red sky, was an old, forgotten gas station. Its paint peeling, the sign barely hanging on. And then, a sleek black limousine pulled in, cutting through the stillness like a shadow from the past. The car stopped. The door opened with a soft click. A man stepped out. He wore a black suit perfectly tailored, Italian leather shoes, a gold Rolex that caught the last rays of sunlight. He looked like someone from Wall Street, not the desert. But his eyes told another story. He held a small wooden box, scratched, weathered, like it had lived through something just like him. From the station, an elderly woman slowly stepped outside. Her silver hair framed a face lined with time, but her eyes were kind. She looked at him and asked gently, "Can I help you, sir?" He paused, swallowed hard, then spoke barely above a whisper, "I didn't come for gas. I came because of a promise. One I broke 40 years ago. What was hidden inside that box? What kind of past could bring a billionaire to his knees in front of a woman he once forgot? And what truth could make you look back at your own life with completely different eyes? Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about regret. It's about redemption and the power of one forgotten promise to heal what time could not. Let us know where you're watching from, because sometimes the right story finds you at exactly the right time. He hadn't been back to Winslow in over 40 years, not since that summer, the summer everything changed. The sun was beginning to set now, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The sky bled orange and gold as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The limousine rolled to a stop in front of the old gas station. It hadn't changed much. The paint was still chipped. The Coca-Cola sign above the door still faded. Even the creak of the porch steps sounded the same. Inside the car, he sat for a moment longer. His name was Thomas Gray. A man who had once made headlines, built empires, whispered deals into the ears of presidents and kings. But none of that mattered now. Not out here. Not with that box in his hands. The box wasn't large, maybe the size of a small shoebox, made of cedar worn smooth with time. One corner was chipped, the latch barely held. But it was what the box represented that made his chest ache every time he looked at it. Memory. Regret. A promise whispered under a starlit sky and never kept. The screen door creaked as she stepped out. Eleanor had heard the engine. Deep, unfamiliar. Not like the pickup trucks that rumbled by once in a while. She didn't recognize the man at first. His face was older, harder. Time had taken away the softness of youth and left in its place the lines of decision, ambition, and, yes, regret. But then he looked up, and in that moment 40 years dissolved like morning mist. She saw it, the same eyes, the same hesitation before speaking, the same silence that always carried more weight than words. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, though part of her already knew. He hesitated, just like before. Then his voice cracked as he said, "Ellie, I never forgot. Not once. And I'm here because I finally found it." He held out the box. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. But she didn't open it. Not yet. Winslow wasn't much back then. Just a two-stoplight town with a diner that closed early and a radio station that still played Johnny Cash on loop. But to him, to Tommy, The 22-year-old kid with oil on his hands and dreams bigger than the desert sky. It was home. He worked at this same gas station, pumping gas, cleaning windshields, fixing flats, and every Thursday at 4:10 p.m. sharp, she would drive up in her rusty blue Ford. Eleanor. Not Ellie yet. Not to him. Back then she was just the girl with the notebooks, always scribbling poetry, humming Patsy Cline under her breath. She'd lean out the window and smile, that soft sideways smile that made his knees go weak. "Fill her up, Tommy?" she'd ask. And every week he'd pretend like he didn't know her name was already carved into the soft part of his heart. They never called it love. But when she read her poems to him under the stars, sitting on the hood of that old Ford, drinking root beer and listening to coyotes in the distance, something sacred passed between them, something unspoken. One night, just before she left for college in Flagstaff, she handed him a small cedar box. "Don't open it," she said. "Not until you've made something of yourself." He laughed, brushing her hair from her eyes. "That might take a while." "I'll wait," she whispered. "Just don't forget me." He didn't say it out loud, but he made a promise in his soul that night. He would come back. He would return with something more than gas-stained hands and dusty jeans. He'd be someone she could be proud of. But life doesn't wait. Dreams get heavy. Time moves fast. And the heart, well, it doesn't always follow the map we draw. The letter came in the fall. Eleanor had waited all summer. She kept checking the mailbox by the roadside, her fingers trembling slightly each time she pulled it open. Nothing. Then one crisp October morning, there it was. A thin white envelope with a New York return address. Inside, a note, short, formal. "Ellie, I'm sorry, I can't come back right now. The opportunity here is too big. I hope you understand." That was all. No mention of the box, no "I miss you," no "wait for me." She sat on the porch that evening, holding the letter in one hand and the empty box she had given him in the other. Its twin, the one she kept. And for the first time in years she cried without holding back. Because she hadn't just given him a box. She had given him the last piece of her hope. But New York swallowed him. His name started appearing in business magazines, a startup, then a second one. By the time she heard his name again, he was Thomas Gray, founder and CEO, shaking hands with senators and CEOs. And she stayed, ran the gas station after her father passed. Learned to live without the sound of his voice, the way he'd laugh when he got nervous. Sometimes she would still open her cedar box. Hers was still filled with poems. Old receipts, a photo of them at the 4th of July fair. But the other box, the one he took with him, was never mentioned again. Not until today. The air felt heavier now. Not from the heat, but from the words that hadn't yet been said. Thomas stood there, his hands trembling more than he liked. The box rested between them, cedar wood, weathered edges, untouched for 4 decades. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. Not with anger, not even with pain, just the quiet recognition of a life that had moved on, but never fully let go. "You never opened it?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I was afraid to." "Why now?" He swallowed, looked down. "Because success means nothing if it cost you the only person who ever saw you, before the world did." A pause, then, "And because I'm tired of being haunted by a promise I didn't keep." She nodded, slowly, then reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she lifted the latch. Click. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. A note. Her handwriting, familiar though older now. He picked it up, unfolded it with shaking hands. If you're reading this, it means you found your way back. And that means more to me than any title, any suit, any city skyline. I didn't need you to become powerful. I just needed you to come home. Underneath the note was a pressed wildflower. Faded, fragile, the same kind that grew behind the station where they used to sit and talk about forever. Thomas blinked, but the tears still came. Not out of guilt, not anymore, but from the aching, beautiful realization that somewhere inside him, beneath the fortune, the headlines, the hollow victories, he had never stopped being that boy under the stars. And she had never stopped being his compass, not even once. Sometimes the promises we break are the ones that guide us home. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Tell us, who is the person you still think about even after all these years? And if you believe in second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe, because we have more stories like this waiting to be told. They sat together on the old wooden bench by the pump, just like they used to. But now, there were more wrinkles, more silence, more knowing in the eyes. The sun had dipped low. Shadows stretched long across the desert floor. He turned to her. "I don't deserve it," he said. "Not your kindness, not your time, not this moment." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked out at the horizon. "We were kids, Tommy. But I left you." She smiled, the kind of smile that only comes with age. "You didn't leave me. You left you." He stared at her. "You don't need to be forgiven, Thomas. You just need to forgive yourself." And with that, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her cedar box, the one she had kept all these years, set it beside his. 2 boxes, 2 lives, 2 different journeys that somehow found their way back to the same porch under the same sky. No fireworks, no grand speeches, just the quiet beauty of a full-circle moment. Sometimes healing doesn't come in answers. It comes in being seen, in being heard, in knowing you were never forgotten. Reflection for the viewer. What would you say if you had one last chance to go back? Not to change the past, but to say the one thing that was left unsaid. Would you have the courage to open your box? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you of someone, maybe it's time to reach out to them. Because sometimes the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next week for another story that might just stay with you long after the screen fades to black.